From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
From the governor on down the ballot.
Rhode Island was very clear, clear majority, so it feels wonderful.
State Democrats had a very good election day. In the governor's race, Raimondo won by a wide margin, and this time she was able to crack 50% of the vote. Plus, what the Democrats taking back the U.S. House and the GOP getting a stronger foothold mean to Rhode Island's congressional delegation. We break down what you need to know from Election Day with a political roundtable this week on Newsmakers. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on this political roundtable, Eyewitness News political analyst Joe Fleming, Roger Williams University political science professor June Speakman. To my right, we have Lisa Pelosi. She was former communications director for Governor Lincoln Almond, and the indefatigable Ted Nesi is on the roundtable. All right, we're going to go around real quick.
word.
You are relentless.
Yeah.
You are relentless. All right, Ted, we'll start with you. Real quick. What surprised you most about election night?
In the end, I was surprised by the governor's strength. I think we knew her campaign was picking up steam in the end, and they were really doing a good job. But to hit 53% with 6 candidates on the ballot for a governor who only had 41% last time and has not had fantastic approval ratings was quite an accomplishment by her campaign, I think.
What surprised you, Lisa?
Well, we all heard about a blue wave coming, and I was laughing because I thought, we're so blue in Rhode Island, how more blue could we go? Until I looked at my hometown of East Greenwich, when the whole council went Democrat and our House and Senate seats went Democrat, and I thought, wow, that wave just came over one more time.
And we're going to talk about why that probably happened. Joe?
The strength of the Trump effect. I knew it would have an effect in Rhode Island, but what a big effect it had. Donald Trump really hurt the Republicans in Rhode Island. Democrats are winning everywhere. They picked up seats in the House. As you said, town councils went Democratic. So if you're a Republican, you were getting killed because of Donald Trump, I believe.
And we might have just answered the why. June?
I was surprised at the size of Mayor Elorza's margin. Given the late negative ads and the number of Whitman signs on the east side, one might have expected a smaller margin, but his was a significant victory.
All right, let's, just to put in context the governor's race, let's pull up the election results from that night, and you're looking at them. Governor Gina Raimondo won re-election with 53% of the vote, Alan Fung at 37%, and Joe Trillo just 4%. Ted, that's where I want to start this conversation. When you look at those numbers, you can easily say, unlike the late Bob Healy in 2014, Joe Trillo had no impact on the final outcome. Is that a fair assessment?
No, and I actually think there's increasing agreement among people who follow politics around that Joe Trillo's effect is not about the votes he got clearly when he only got 4%. It's about the attention he received from the media, his involvement in the debates, his pretty relentless criticism of Alan Fung. He did criticize the governor, but there was just more passion, I would say, between his criticism of Alan Fung. And then the time the Fung campaign seemed to be spending worrying about Joe Trillo, mounting attacks on Joe Trillo. Even the fact that their final, one of their final critical ads was about UHIP, but they had to lop kind of 5 seconds of Joe Trillo criticism on the first 30 seconds of the ad to make sure he was also getting hurt by that. So I think Joe Trillo had an effect despite his paltry number of votes.
Joe?
I totally agree. I mean, look at the Channel 12 Roger Williams College University debate. Joe Trillo and Alan Fung were going at each other. The governor was standing in the middle smiling. I mean, that hurt Alan Fung. He was not able to go after the governor. He could not make a case of not re-electing this governor at all. He didn't have the resources to do that, and she had plenty of resources.
Lisa, where do you think the Fung campaign stumbled the most?
Oh, there's so many places. But let me, I think the more direct is that they didn't talk during the primary, that they were so quiet during those months leading up to September. And he really violated one of the basics 101 of campaigning. He allowed Gina Raimondo to define who he was as a candidate because he wasn't out there for months saying, this is who I am. She comes out after the September primary with those devastating ads to define him. That debate right there, people are tuning in, the independents trying to figure out who to go to. And then that was just, that debate was so devastating because of Trillo and how that happened. Also, what happened with Trillo and the governor is one of Mayor Fung's most strong points was his likability. People liked him. And between how he had to react to Joe Trillo and those ads from Gina Raimondo, his likability just went down.
I do think, I just, as you know,
the primary point was such a good one.
Yeah, as the covering the campaign day to day, I agree with Lisa that I was just so surprised by, frankly, the quiet quietness of the Fung campaign. He had, I believe he had no public events where reporters could ask him questions from the time of his October 2017 launch until into September of 2018 after the primary. I thought he would have events every day as soon as the primary was over, and they did eventually ramp up his public schedule, but by then the governor had built up potentially about a 10-point lead.
And you can criticize both Alan Fung and Governor Raimondo for not taking part in debates, but on the flip side, the governor was accessible to reporters. Well, she's a sitting governor, so you have to be and you should be, but she was out answering questions
She was
all the time.
present very much, even if she wasn't specifically debating Matt Brown, but we really didn't see Alan Fung a lot.
But I think that was definitely Alan Fung's plan to keep quiet before the primary. And I think part of that could have been based on the fact that the governor had very low job ratings. And campaigns sometimes put too much emphasis on how low a job rating is, because people can turn that around. We saw that with David Cicilline in 2012, where his job rating was in the 20s, yet he won the election over Brendan Doherty convincingly. And I think what may happen here, they may have thought, well, the governor cannot move her numbers. We can wait till right after the primary and move the numbers. But they were wrong, because she had the resources to move those numbers.
And there was a gap. I'll shut up in a sec, but there was also
I don't think
there's
that's
so much
true.
to talk about. There was always a gap in Joe's polling for Channel 12 and for Roger Williams between her job rating and her favorable rating. And it struck me all year long the governor had a 50% favorable rating, which said to me there were people out there who weren't yet with the governor, but were warm enough to where maybe she could win them over, and she clearly did.
June, so 53% was the governor's final number. 2014, she had 41%. What was her single biggest achievement, you think, for this campaign, especially when you reflect on 14?
Well, the absence of Bob Healy was the reason that we see such a big difference in her numbers. But she was really out there in the field, and she had a terrific ground game. She had lots of volunteers. She had a coordinated campaign with Senator Whitehouse, Representative Cicilline, and they were everywhere. Not only their volunteers knocking doors and making calls, but also Gina herself. She was out at the church fairs and walking with local candidates and eating at local restaurants and interacting with voters one-on-one. And again, that's something that you don't pick up maybe in the polls, and you certainly don't, the media can't be everywhere she is, but I think that had a significant effect moving her numbers.
So you said something about Bob Healy. Conventional wisdom was that Bob Healy hurt Alan Fung in 2014, but when you look at these numbers, Alan Fung sort of just stayed the same. He gained a point. Governor Raimondo went up, 13 points. So
but
does that mean...
But they also changed the electorate because turnout grew so much. I mean, we went from one of the lowest turnout governor races in 2014 to now probably the second highest in the last half century.
But I also said back in 2014, a lot of Bob Healy votes were union votes. Union people who were very upset with Gina Raimondo as treasurer with the pensions. This time that's changed. The AFL-CIO endorsed it. The NAA, Bob Walsh, endorsed her. I mean, so she had union support this time, where last time I think those votes went to Bob Healy. This time a lot of them, not all of them, but some of them came back to her.
Do you think Alan Fung runs again in 2022? I know it's hard to predict, but...
No. I don't. Because he's term limited, so he has 2 more years to be mayor. So then he'd be 2 years, just what will he be doing for those 2 years unless he's gearing up for another campaign? I think the party has to say, okay, you've had 2 times. You weren't able to really move the needle. We saw that he didn't move the numbers at all. No. We need somebody fresh.
All right, so it wasn't just the governor's race that was a plus for Democrats. White House won by a very wide margin. Just go all the way down the ballot. True or false, state Democrats should send Donald Trump a fruit basket?
Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely.
Was that purely the Trump effect?
I think it had a major impact. Plus, as June said, the Democrat ground game. They invested $600,000 in the Democratic Party before the primary. They used that to turn out the vote in Providence. 78% of the people voted for Gina Raimondo in Providence. Last time it was like 68%.
And this is the Obama model, the turnout model, where you identify your voters and then you stay with them, and then the week before the election you get all of your candidates and all of their volunteers out in the district and keep hammering on people until they promise you they will vote. The question is, what is your plan to vote? When are you going to vote? Can we get you a ride to the polls? And it's a very effective way of turning out voters.
Lisa, what do Republicans in this state do down the road?
Well, I have to say, the morning after I decided I'm moving to Utah. But then I thought, no, you got to stop. You got to stay and fight. So we have to start building, and we start looking at what's next. We need that farm team. We've always talked about building a farm team, and our farm team got decimated this time around. So it's those local races trying to gather candidates. But my concern is, I know we don't want to talk about this, but 4 years from now, how many open seats are we going to have in the general officers? So who are we going to be building up in the next 2 years to win, so then they in turn can take that and bring it to the state level?
I also wonder
Flanders, though? What about Judge Flanders? When he spoke with my students, he talked about exclusively Rhode Island issues. He didn't talk about national issues. A student asked him about foreign policy, and he gave a good answer. But I think he would make a great gubernatorial candidate for the Republicans.
And they're two different. Those are two different campaigns, whether you're running federal or state, and they're two different jobs. And he made it clear that he did not want the job of being that top executive in the state as governor.
I think the part of the challenge for the Republicans, and it reminds me of what you see happening to Democrats in states like Mississippi that are very red, is every time you go through a cycle and you see credible candidates, Alan Fung, Bob Flanders, not even get very close, it sends a message to the next Republican who might think about trying to mount a statewide campaign. I think, for example, one that always sticks out to me, Dawson Hodgson's run for AG in 2014, widely seen as one of the best, moderate, very much into good government. Peter Kilmartin not seen as a super strong candidate. In the end, though, Hodgson did really no better than any of the other Republicans on the ballot in 2014. And I think the more evidence there is that it feels to the Republicans there's nothing you can do in Rhode Island to overcome that Democratic thing, unless you have you need someone with such a large amount of money that maybe they can put millions of dollars into a campaign.
No, what you need is the Trojan horse election. You run as a Democrat, and then when you get elected, you switch over to Republican.
But also, you need those millions of dollars, but you need a ground game. I've seen a lot of Republicans with state reps, senators. It's a one-person campaign. They're out knocking on doors. They don't have groups out there in the field helping them, where the Democrats do. That's a big difference at the local level.
And you also, as Lisa pointed out, in East Greenwich, she talked about the farm team. That's such an important point. When you have a bad election year like this, it's not just about Alan Fung not becoming governor. It's about, I think of in East Greenwich, Anthony Giarrusso, a rep who had been buzzed about as potentially maybe a statewide candidate at some point, got defeated by a progressive one, I believe it was Justine Caldwell in that district. Justine Caldwell defeated him. He could mount a comeback, but there's another person they thought might have had some hope in the future who's now not in office.
All right, we got to go to a break, so this question seems appropriate as we go into a commercial break, which will be, campaign ad free, I promise our viewers. What was the most effective or your favorite, briefly, campaign ad from this election season?
No, you go first.
I thought the ones where Gina Raimondo didn't talk herself, I don't mean that personally, but I thought it showed how effective it can be when you have someone else speak to it. Dave Chenevert, the Manufacturing Association, running around his factory talking about the governor's work on manufacturing, I thought was very, very effective.
Lisa?
I liked a couple of Bob Flanders because they had some humor to them. I mean, I know people don't like that Sheldon Whitehouse was called a doofus, but when you hear that for the first time in a commercial, you do kind of react to it, you pay attention to it. So I liked his softer touch that he did with his commercials.
Yeah, the humor was pretty good.
It has to be the fanboy to me. There's
no Trump fanboy.
The Trump fanboy, no question about that.
It's a DGA ad, wasn't it?
I think it was.
Yeah.
But it really tied Alan Fung to Donald Trump. Now, that might have took votes away from Trillo because it gave Fung Trump supporters, but it really hurt him in Rhode Island, especially with the blue wave.
That hat, the picture with the hat was so devastating, I think, to Alan Fung.
Yeah. I like Sheldon Whitehouse's ad with the oyster farmer. I think that shows that the Democrats, as you said, are understanding the mistakes they made in 2016, not connecting with the working class, and I think that was a very effective ad. Connects his work in Washington on climate change with an issue important at home.
Yeah, that was a smart move by them because June's such a good point. He was getting knocked in the Flanders ad at that time about climate change too much, so he tried to make the argument through the owner of Matutic Oyster Bar. It helps the economy if we prevent climate change.
When we come back on Newsmakers, we're going to take a look at what the national political picture means to the Rhode Island delegation, and could there be a Speaker Cicilline? Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me for this political roundtable, June Speakman from Roger Williams University, Joe Fleming, our political analyst, Lisa Pelosi, also a political analyst, and Ted Nesi, eyewitness news reporter. We have a quick soundbite, I think, Nick, from Congressman David Cicilline from election night. Let's take a listen.
Do you fully expect Nancy Pelosi to be Speaker?
I do. I mean, it depends in large part on how much we take it back by. There are a number of candidates who said they won't vote for her, but so I think it will depend on that.
Congressman David Cicilline, and at that point when I was interviewing him on election night, it was unclear where the House stood. So why don't we bring up a balance of power chart that we have from WPRI.com, and this is where things stand right now. There are still some seats that have to be decided upon right now, but it's pretty clear the blue has moved over from 2016, and no matter what happens with those gray seats right in the middle, and by the way, we're taping this program on a Friday morning. When a lot of you are watching this program, those seats will probably, many of them will be decided. No matter what happens, though, the blue will take over. So, Ted, Congressman Cicilline running for the number 4 spot in House Democrats, and it always feels like Rhode Island punches above its weight with the delegation Claiborne Pell, John Chafee, Jack Reed, and now we could have a number 4 House Democrat. A lot of people, they don't know what that means. What does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, day to day, I don't think it means that if David Cicilline wins this, and we should say it's a contested race, he might not win that position. He has at least one opponent, and might end up with more. Should be decided by the end of November. But in theory, it could put David Cicilline, he's already got a leadership position, but just a few rungs below Nancy Pelosi. And Nancy Pelosi's top 2 lieutenants right now are also in their 70s, and there's a lot of talk about, does the House Democratic Caucus in Washington need to start looking to younger leaders? This would clearly position Cicilline to be part of that conversation. There's plenty of ambition in the House. I don't think everyone's going to just roll over and let David Cicilline take over for Nancy Pelosi. But on the other hand, he's a lot closer than a lot of other congresspeople are.
You know the last time the U.S. House had a speaker from Rhode Island?
No.
Never. Oh. Is the answer. I looked it up this morning, and it has never happened.
But Joe Martin of North Attleboro was Speaker of the House.
Right. I think Massachusetts leads in states with speakers of the House. Anyway. But do you think that's a possibility? We could have a Speaker, David Cicilline. I asked the question going into break. We might as well answer it. What do you think, June?
He's a very effective politician, both here in the 1st Congressional District and inside Congress. And what that does for Rhode Island, of course, is as he rises in leadership, he increases his influence with other members of Congress. And if an issue of importance to Rhode Island comes up, he's got a lot of friends in the chamber.
Lisa, good night for Republicans in the U.S. Senate. They gained ground there.
Right.
And you have to think the confirmation hearings of Judge Kavanaugh played a big role in that.
It did. It did in all the races when you think about it. When you look at West Virginia, the Democrat won, but the Democrat voted for Justice Kavanaugh. The senators who voted against, they lost in North Dakota and in Missouri. And there was a Trump factor there. We keep talking about the Trump factor. It was either positive or negative. Right. But yeah, he did well in the Senate. And what it did, which is very curious too, is senators from Maine and Alaska, Murkowski and Collins that had weight going into this election, that you had to get them on board for the numbers. They're not as important now going forward with the higher numbers. They don't have to, the Republicans don't have to appease the more moderate Republicans going forward.
So you have the House is in Democratic control, the Senate GOP, and the executive branch of course, Republican. Joe, does this just mean logjam city for at least the next 2 years?
There's a good possibility it could mean logjam. If I'm Nancy Pelosi, what I would do is try to pass as much as I can through the House and throw it over to the Senate and let the Senate kill it if they want, which would stop Donald Trump from attacking the House. Because what Trump's going to say is, we couldn't make progress in the last 2 years because the House was blocking everything we wanted to do. So, I mean, I think it's going to be a real interesting scenario. I don't think we're going to see the old days of Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill sitting down and working things out.
I think scotch.
Right. There might be some of that early on. Infrastructure might be an area where they might agree upon. But after that, on immigration, I don't see any compromise there.
Ted, the answer to my question to Congressman Cicilline, I think, I'm sure we asked him 4, 6, 8 years ago, whatever, would you vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker of the House? I'm sure his answer is still yes, but he couched it in that answer. He said, well, we'll see what the makeup is and how, and so that is a stark difference from
Well, don't forget, Nancy Pelosi opposed David Cicilline when he ran for House leadership 2 years ago. His current position, she backed other candidates. He ran against her will and managed to win. Now, David Cicilline knows how to charm someone, and they have become friendly again, and they're fine. But on the other hand, I think he's actually a little less of a Pelosi loyalist than people sometimes perceive in Rhode Island.
Well, and also, I think, isn't there a recognition even from David Cicilline about how polarizing Nancy Pelosi is nationally? I mean, Lisa, she was the Republican punching bag in, Utah. I mean, she's a lawmaker from California.
And she was used in ads too, throughout the country. So I think it's going to be very. Let me just put, as a Republican, I'm very happy the House went Democrat.
Why?
Because I want the balance, and I want to see if hopefully if the House doesn't use this as retaliation against the president, but instead let's work together and let's move forward on a couple of issues that have importance. Let's make that happen and compromise and get that over to to the Senate.
That could be the biggest mistake the House makes if they try to retaliate against the president, because now you're giving Donald Trump ammunition for the 2020 election. So you're right, they have to be very careful.
I don't see that happening. I don't see that happening. I think the House Democrats are going to look to put some policy proposals forward. Call me optimistic, but one can hope. And again, in his wild press conference the other day, the president said that he would like to make some deals with
But there
the
are
Democrats.
little things they could do, right? They could issue subpoenas for his tax returns. Yeah. I think what you're talking about is impeachment.
Right. Yeah. That would be a big mistake.
I don't think they'll do that.
All right, let's bring it back to the local lawmakers, Ted. Speaker Mattiello won re-election, and enough lawmakers in the caucus last night, again, we tape on a Friday, pledged to support him for Speaker, but it was pretty bumpy.
Yeah, I mean, he won at the caucus 44-21. You need 38 votes to become Speaker, so he's only had a margin about seven votes, unless he was going to dip into Republican votes to try to stay on as Speaker. And you saw, though, you are just seeing a much more vocal opposition to Speaker Mattiello in the wake of how last year's session went. The revelation, our report about Cale Keeble and how Speaker Mattiello handled Representative Kazarian's sexual harassment allegations. Even the other night, his interaction with our colleague Kim Kalunian at his victory party, where he said he doesn't want to do interviews anymore with media outlets he doesn't like their coverage. I think all of that is playing into a perception of Speaker Mattiello as getting too out of touch for a block of Democrats. So to have 21 against him, he already has a problem. Yes, he's going to be Speaker. You need 50 votes to pass the budget.
Wait a minute, but just remind everybody, there still has to be another vote in January.
Yes, I gave my house. There's an official vote in January on the floor as Speaker. I still, if I had to bet, would bet he can win that, barring some major revelation over the next 2 months. I mean, those 44 votes he had last night at the caucus, I would expect should stay for him. He has a lot of levers of power to keep those votes. But even there, as I said, the biggest thing he has to do every year is pass a budget. You need 50 votes to pass the budget. 66 Democrats, subtract 21, he doesn't have 50 votes. That means, does he have to do deals with the Republicans? Does he try to win some of the rebel Democrats back? He's got an actual challenge there.
But look, the way the House operates is problematic, right? So it's not only passing the budget, it's also doing the House's business in a way that is transparent to the public, that moves legislation forward, even if the Speaker himself personally opposes it. So it's the thing that these opponents are most upset about is the fact that their legislation gets blocked. It never sees the light of day. Promises they made to their constituents during the campaign can't be met or even discussed because he blocks them up in committee. And that's what they're asking for, change in the rules of the House.
I remember when Senate President Teresa Paiva-Weed pushed the budget back to the House. I think it was Speaker Gordon Fox at that time. Do you think the Senate smells blood?
I think so. I was at the Senate caucus last night, which, thank you, Senate, was open to the media, unlike the House caucus, so I went and attended, and there were some interesting fireworks there. But talking to Senate President Ruggiero after, he feels very confident. He does not have that kind of problem in his caucus on the Senate side. He's got 33 Democrats, and all but 2 of them voted for him to stay as Senate President that night. And I think he feels like he gets along better with the governor than the Speaker. They're aligned. She just got a mandate by winning a majority of the vote. I think Senate President Ruggiero was just very upbeat about what he thinks he can do, and frankly about his position vis-a-vis the House going forward.
I think this is also, Ted, setting up something you're going to really love. A lot of Democratic primaries for 2020. Yeah. I see the progressives trying to pick up another half dozen or so seats, but at the same time, I would have to think the Mattiello forces are going to run candidates against the progressives, try to find some good candidates, because if not, they're going to lose even more power. So.
I don't want to think about 2022. Well, let's.
And we haven't even talked about 2022.
Well, that's what. Why don't we do that real quick? Lisa, I know you touched on it, but what's your advice to the Republican Party going into 2022?
Start recruiting, and if we have one election before that, so what can we do in 2 years to start placing some people in key positions, in those town councils that can start to build, or start to look at other non-government people, business people, to start recruiting. That's what is done across the country. They chose veterans, they chose business people who've never been involved in government, and start working with them and getting them ready, preparing them, educating them, and then moving forward.
So 2020 will be a presidential year. Right. Traditionally, turnout's pretty high for presidential years. Is that good or bad for Republicans that are hoping to boost numbers, particularly in the General Assembly?
In Rhode Island, it usually helps the Democrats. Right. Democrats do better in presidential years in Rhode Island. But there are a number of General Assembly seats that Democrats won that are fairly Republican districts. like Senate 35 in East Greenwich and that whole piece. That's usually a strong Republican district.
I don't know if we have it, but we made a map of the state, and it was really interesting to me to see the sort of the western side of Rhode Island above the coast was all red. Every town that voted for Alan Fung was adjoining each other. You could draw a border, and then on the other side, the east and then the bay was all blue Gina Raimondo towns. And I think you may start to see Rhode Island reflecting the nation, where the red side of Rhode Island gets redder and becomes more strongly Republican, and the blue side gets bluer, and you could start to see sort of geographic, back and forth.
But one thing that came out of this election.
We have that map on the screen that Ted was just talking about. 30 seconds left, Lisa.
And really quickly, because the Republicans are ceding Providence. And here's two major elections, two general elections that the Democrat got so many votes in Providence, you're digging yourself out of a hole. The next Republican has to be able to appeal to some of the Providence voters.
I got to cut you off. I'm sorry. And I want to do that because I want to thank Roger Williams University. We partnered with them for our 4 polls, and we did a debate on their campus. Some good people down in Bristol, Rhode Island. So we thank Roger Williams University. And I thank you for watching Political Roundtable and Eyewitness News. Newsmakers, we'll see you next week.